Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have with me Tom Wilson. Tom is one of our brilliant solution architects in our team. But interestingly, Tom has made the transition a few years back from academia into industry. And I wanted to bring Tom onto the show to hear about his experiences of work of being in academia, his experiences that he had there, and then that transition into industry and then his progression through industry and explore some of the differences, some of the similarities, what he learned at academia, what was used in industry, and just get a view for people that are looking to make that transition and understand sort of different routes and career paths out of academia. So Tom, welcome along to the show. Good to have you here.
Thanks very much for having me, Jason. It's a pleasure.
No worries. And so let's kick off a little bit about just like roll back the years a bit and sort of introduce yourself, I guess, in terms of what you know, and use that as opportunity to explain what you did in academia and your experiences there. Because I think that's sort of the foundational part and it will kind of help us build the conversation. So yeah, a bit of an intro to you and your sort of background in academia, and it will be great to get kicked off.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah. So I came from a science background, really. So I think a lot of data specialists, data scientists, data analysts come from a sciencey background. I started out with an undergraduate in physics. I did that from, I think it was 2010, going back a long way, like 2010 to 2014. I did an undergraduate master's over those 4 years. That was fairly broad physics, but I specialized in satellite technology, satellite design, because that was where my head was at the time. And that was great fun. I really enjoyed that. You learn an awful lot of really, really great skills doing a physics degree or any science degree, really, especially programming. That was one of the key things that I really got enthused with there. I didn't really have a good sort of IT or computer science course in my secondary school. So when I got to university and I first started to program, that was one of the big like eye-opening moments. Like, wow, I actually really enjoy doing this. So that was that was great. I did that for 4 years, as I say, and I decided probably more towards the end of it. As I did a couple of summer projects just to tide me over through the summer. I got fortunate there with a couple of paid internships at the university to do some research. I just realized I really enjoyed doing research. And so that's why, one thing led to another, and it got me into thinking about doing my PhD, my doctorate. And towards the end, I started applying and I found a couple of options. And then, the one just stood out to me at Imperial College, which was working with the renewable energy, the solar cell, the photovoltaic cell, solar cell team at Imperial College. So that's kind of where I transitioned. And that's, it was partly at the time, you have to always want to do a PhD to go and do one, but there was just certainly as part of me thinking, well, this is a good route. I've got an offer here. I haven't got to go and look for a job. So certainly at that point in my life, I was very keen to kind of keep things simple, and the offer was there. It seemed like a good opportunity. I'll take it. So that's
excuse my ignorance, but was is that PhD sort of research project that you did, was that related to physics and satellites, or was it something totally different?
It wasn't. It was certainly physics related, but it wasn't related to satellites. I left that avenue behind. So I had to dig it out because I couldn't remember the title of it. My thesis is here. It was on. You can't really see it; it's blurring. But anyway, it's on photovoltaic cells, so solar cells, basically. So that was one of the things I wanted to try and do when I moved. I was quite keen to do. So I specialized in research-wise in semiconductors. So when I did my research project, it was on laser devices and laser power converters, or detectors. So I was in that space, and my supervisor for my master's knew someone at Imperial College in London who was heading up the photovoltaic cell, the solar cell team, looking at some really cool materials. So that's where, so I made the contact there and got involved with that. So it was it was a good move, and I really enjoyed it. It was what I was doing. I'll briefly explain what I did. So it was to look at new materials for very highly efficient solar cells. So the idea being is these are solar cells that you wouldn't necessarily put on the roof of your house because they cost lots of money, hundreds of dollars per watt, as opposed to like a silicon solar cell that's below sort of $5 to $1 per watt now. I think they're very cheap, so more expensive, but they have a much higher power conversion efficiency. So you might be getting 45% conversion efficiency from these cells, whereas silicon you get maximum 20%. So it's that sort of thing. And they and you might think, where are they used? Are they so expensive? Well, they tend to get used on satellites, where the power to weight ratio is very important. and the cost is less of an less of a barrier for them, I suppose. Just
right.
spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to send satellites into space, how much the sales cost is kind of irrelevant. So that was where I spent most of my time for 4 years, really, or 3.5 years doing that.
And specifically, what were you doing on that then? Which part were you involved with?
Yeah, so again, like all PhDs, you kind of end up, you have this quite broad, you have physics, you can get down to semiconductors, you narrow it down to solar cells. And I did a little bit, like one material, I was looking at one particular material system, right. Which was called gallium arsenide bismide, but I won't dwell too much on the technical side of that. Anyway, it was a very small material system. What I was doing primarily was doing two things. One was doing sort of characterization, optical characterization. So in the lab, firing lasers at this little sample and measuring how it emitted light back, or how it luminesced. That was one thing we were doing. And then the other thing I did a lot of was modeling. And this is kind of where I got into the data analytics and data science side of things. I spent a lot of my time writing code to model this solar cell and how it would perform under different types of illumination. I was investigating because it was a very novel material. It's a very new and different type of material. There's also kind of materials and understanding how the light interacts with different atoms and defects in the material. So it was quite specific, but that's kind of where I did. It was basically half and half, sort of theoretical modeling and experimental.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. And then I know where this journey goes, but of course, at some point you took the decision to kind of move out of research and academia and move into industry. So what was the kind of thought process there? Why did you come to the end of the project and it was like, well, I'm done and there's nothing else to do, or was it more I want to move on to something different, and sort of craft my my experience elsewhere?
Yeah. I think it's certainly a bit of both, really. I mean, I really enjoyed my PhD. I think it was a very enjoyable 4 years of my life. It was tough at times, but also it was probably some of the most interesting work I've ever had the privilege of doing. I mean, as you can probably imagine, just being on the cutting edge, being able to sit in a lab and do science experiments all day is pretty good. It's pretty fun and very interesting. But there's lots of ups and downs in academia. It's quite a kind of a cutthroat place, unless you're kind of getting results and unless you're getting papers published or going to conferences and getting interest. It can be quite demoralizing because you end up spending so much of your time working on a very niche piece of science, and if no one cares about it, it's really obvious because no one comes and talks to you at conferences, no one comes and is interested in your paper, and it takes age to get papers published. So there's definitely that side of it, which is not so nice. Some academics can be very pushy as well, because they're pushing. It's a business to them. They need to get funding, they need to get publications out in good journals. So there's lots of pushing as to make sure it goes into the right journal so they get the funding for this project, etc. I was lucky. My supervisor was was great. He let us do whatever we wanted to do, really publish our work wherever we wanted to publish it. So I didn't have that side. But I decided, I think, to make the move towards the end of my PhD because two reasons. One was that to your point, there wasn't really a neat continuation. I'd done my project. If there had been the offer on the table or an option to stay at Imperial College and continue working on my project, or at least in the same research group doing photovoltaic cell research, I probably would have stayed at least to do a couple more years as a postdoc researcher. But the problem was my boss, out of the blue, got an offer to go and work in Australia. And so he kind of up ship quite quickly in 2017 and left to go and start basically the same team but in Australia in a big university out there, in the University of New South Wales, which is great. It was a good career move for him, but it did kind of leave people in our team. It basically meant the end of the research group at Imperial College, and because of some personal reasons, questioning,
is this now a good time to think about something else?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was always thinking about it. I always had it because I spent a lot of my work doing sort of data science type things, lots of analysis, lots of modeling, lots of approaches like that. I was always interested in doing that. That's what I could see myself doing as I moved into industry. So I always had it at the back of my mind. But then in that kind of final year, I was making decisions. That one thing made a big impact. Just there wasn't really going to be an option to stay here and do similar research going forward. That was a real blow. The other one was, I think, slightly more that, going back to my point about being demoralized. I spent the final year of my PhD, I spent a lot of my time doing some particular modeling and some theoretical work on what I thought was a really interesting problem. And I went to a conference in Amsterdam in September 2017, and it got like zero interest essentially. So it's just one of those points when you've done all this work and you have this demoralized. It was just quite demoralizing. I think at that point I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I can't. I want to change. And so that's at that point was when I started to really, really think about making the move from academia into industry. And of course,
and did you know you wanted to do that in data science?
So
was that always the plan, or did you kind of look at a few different avenues you could have taken?
No, for me that was very, very much always the plan. I thought to myself, what do I enjoy most about my PhD? I enjoy doing, I enjoy doing experimental work, but I think probably more the biggest piece of enjoyment's been doing the computer code in the modeling. So I wanted to do something where I could keep doing scientific computing essentially, but in industry and and to me, and that's where I kind of arrived at data science. That enabled that seemed to be the career field, the area in which I could take a lot of my computer science knowledge that I've gathered, apply lots of scientific modeling techniques, and do it in industry to create real business value. And so that's really why I landed on the data science route. And I didn't really I didn't look at anything else at that point. It was always data analytics, data science.
Yeah, nice. And of course again, I know where you landed up, but yeah, just so for our audience, where did that take you? So from satellites and solar cells to
So in satellites to solar cells, I ended up working for Andrew Lloyd Webber, the theatre impresario, for his company that was called Really Useful Theatres, but they rebranded to LW Theatres a couple of years ago. So it was a theatre company that basically manages and runs the 7 theatres or 6 theatres, I think, that he owns in the West End. And so that was essentially managing and looking at ticketing sales, customers buying tickets, how many people go to events, all that sort of thing, analyzing also. There's lots of data there, lots of avenues for analyzing data in that industry. And it was just it was a bit of a weird jump, I suppose, but I did have an interest in the theatre. I was I was keen on musical theatre, so it wasn't quite so niche. It was very niche to find that role for that company, and I got very lucky with that. And it was purely, I mean, I applied for a number of roles, obviously, like anyone going from academia, whether you're getting a PhD or not, it's still tough to apply for jobs and find new jobs. People didn't want, they wanted someone with experience. I had experience, but not, business experience as a data scientist. So it was tough to find that. And so I was lucky when that obviously came along to start with them as a data analyst at first. I really jumped at it because they had they had some really great ideas. It was a great company to work for. And I could really see the opportunities there with the sort of data that they wanted to analyze as well, which was really interesting.
Did you, because obviously there's a big difference between lasers and testing materials and solar and satellites and all sorts of things, but was there sort of underlying kind of similarities between the approach in unpicking a business scenario at LW Theatres and some analytics and science work that you're doing there versus what you sort of were doing in academia?
Yeah, I think there is always similarities. I think obviously, practically speaking, in terms of when you're measuring samples with a laser in a lab, it's very different to going in and measuring, not really measuring, but understanding, customers going to see certain shows at a theatre venue. But I think there's still certain things. I mean, in terms of like the modelling approach and how you think about how you're gonna model something or how you're going to analyze some data, there's always an element in any data science, data analytics problem. There's an element of data cleansing. That doesn't change whether you're in academia or in the real world. You have to think about the data you've got. Your models or your models or your visualizations are only as good as what you're putting in. So you need to spend a lot of time focusing on the quality of the data that goes in. And that was something that definitely crosses over. I guess the approach to selecting how you're going to approach problems as well are very similar. During doing research, you have a lot of opportunities to do a lot of trial and error, so try various different models, different approaches. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. In industry, you probably haven't quite got that option, that what's the word I want? You haven't got that It's not as easy to do. You haven't got the time to spend doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So you have to be a little bit more. You have to pick something and roll with it, really, and then and know it's going to work. Whereas you could spend months trying to cycle through a whole bunch of different research methods of analyzing something, and it might work slightly better than another one, and you might select that one. Whereas in business, you haven't got that luxury. That's the word, luxury. That's what I wanted. The luxury of being able to do that. So that's certainly one thing you have to bear in mind, like not getting stuck on and going in too much in depth into the problem itself, right? I think in academia, that's kind of the point. You're trying to push the boundary, or like push this needle through a very, very small surface to like make a dent on the surface of a very large sphere. That's kind of what you're doing. You're pushing the boundary in a very small area, and to do that, you have to kind of look at all sorts of different things and difficult techniques. Whereas in industry, there are a lot of techniques that work really well to get to be able to enable the solutions that the business needs. And so I think there's always something to look at, is the balance between the time spent and the value generated is more obviously very important in industry, and it's something that you have to learn and be aware of more, coming from an academic side of things.
Did you find you were given? You talked about sort of the freedom to explore and try things, and of course you're doing research, and I guess the way you've explained the things you're doing at LW Theatre is not quite research. It's applying analytics to a problem, which there's some, as you say, there's some similarities. But did you find you were sort of still had the ability to have that freedom to explore data sets, try and unpick? You talked about customer behavior there. Yeah, was that creativity, that innovation still sort of within what you were doing, or was it much more, here's like a specific challenge we've got, we can apply this model and we're going to run with it?
I think it changed a little bit over the time I was there. I think again, it's with any business in any industry, depending on the resource you've got available and the priorities of the business, it will enable you to have a bit more flexibility. So I think when I first started, and before I kind of ended up, I think, falling into the role that I ended up occupying for 4 years at LW Theatres, there was a lot more of that. I probably felt like I could go away and I could think about, looking at different models and trying to model things in different ways. One of the things I'm just trying to think, optimization wise, there were certain approaches I took in the early part when I was trying to kind of cleanse data or match data up, and I was thinking about, okay, if I can get this data from, let me try and pull this data from here. Let me try and use this Google API to enrich this data set to give us some more information. Let me try and do this. This was about customers and location and trying to work out. I think one of the things I did very early on was to try and take LW Theatre's customer data and kind of enrich their location data a bit. And so to do that, I did things like look up, from a postcode we might have had on file, or from information we had on file, you might be able to look up that in Google Maps or Google Earth and then return, more information about the area, the general area, things like that, and also things like just travel distances. That was another interesting one I did. And so these are things that no one wants me to do, and it wasn't really part of the remit. The remit was to kind of just look at cleansing and stuff like structuring the data better. But I think that was one of those cases where I did feel I had the time and the freedom a little bit at that point to go through and to look at those different things. As kind of the role developed, and as I started taking on different responsibilities at the company, I had less time to do that, really. But it was, I think it definitely depends on the use case you're going for, the questions you're being asked, and the value you're trying to drive. Does this warrant spending 3 days trying to work out the best model, or is it a case where we spend a day and we do some optimization and we get to the end of that day and we draw a conclusion and we go with the best one? It's those differences, isn't it?
How did you find the kind of almost the organization accepting, because I think this was the first sort of data analyst role, data science role they'd had. How did you find they accepted you and your role and the work that you were doing, rather than you personally, I guess? Because it's theatre, it's creative, it's art, and this is very sciencey and data and numbers, and so there's in my head this sort of like a disconnect maybe between putting on shows and data science. So how accepting was the business to the work that you were doing?
I think no. I think the business were always very accepting towards what I was trying to do and what we were trying to. It was a team effort really. We had a small, as you say, I was the first sort of technical data head they had. I think there was a business analyst who did a little bit of data analyst crossover before I started, but he wasn't there when I was there. But we over the kind of the months we built up a little team. We started to work with you good selves when we were building our data warehousing platform, which is one of the main focuses for me having joined the company. And that became essentially my main focus going forward. But I think, and it was amazing to see kind of across that business, like just how much people kind of rely on, well, I think everyone knows businesses rely on data, but how much they rely on data, but were just not comfortable accessing it. So when they had someone there who could access data and was good at it, and they could pull insights out, they could pull data sets together, they could give consolidated data sets to various teams relatively quickly and easily. It was amazing how quickly they were, oh right, oh, that's fantastic, thanks, but can we just have this one, can we have this, so, which is great. I think to answer that question about accepting, that is them accepting you, accepting your work as valuable. The challenge then becomes is how do you manage the resourcing on that as you go forward, to make sure that you don't become a bottleneck for the business, to make sure you're the only one who's able to give this insight or give this data to various people without overloading yourself and not doing your other jobs.
Right, but it's interesting though. You mentioned before one of the things you disliked or sort of certainly came to get some frustration around in academia was the kind of effort and attention and work focused on building a model, doing some research, getting some testing some hypothesis, building a result, and then essentially no one being particularly interested in the output. Now I hear that story from data scientists in organizations where they've worked on a model and they present, their output and the model, and they really want the recipient to understand this brilliant model they built. And there's a sort of lack of interest, and I don't necessarily need to go into all the reasons for that. But there is that in industry. So it doesn't feel like you had that same kind of response to, you gave the example of travel distances or where people sort of geographically come into London from. But did you find a similar kind of lack of acceptance or care for what you were trying to achieve, or actually were people pretty welcoming to knowing this stuff?
Yeah, I think at LW Theatres they were on the whole very welcoming to knowing all this stuff. I mean, yes, that was a good example actually, because I think even though I spent some time, they go, oh, we could do this, we could use these points, and I did. I calculate this driving distance, travel distance, time, etc. from Google Maps. Do they use it? Probably not. It's one of those things where I said, oh, I thought this was really interesting, so I've added this. Oh, great, yeah. But because it doesn't immediately stand out as being interesting to them, it didn't get much. It wasn't received with quite as much enthusiasm as I kind of took from building it. But I guess the thing with LW Theatres was, I think, because I came in there very much as probably the first data analyst, data science they've ever had. The novelty of having someone there who is able to access that data and to do things with that data more than anyone else has in the past was definitely hadn't worn off. I mean, but then to the point about data science is, I don't think I did. So I joined as an analyst. I became a data scientist in title and in role going forward, but I didn't do an awful lot of what you might think of as traditional data science, which is like building machine learning models and deploying them and using that to generate insight. We did a little bit of that. There were times when we could do it, but I think that's the sciencey side of things. That's the more complicated side of things. I spent a lot of my time pulling data together for reports, dashboards, trying to make things more visual, more easy to digest across all levels of the business. And for that, I did get a lot of like, wow, this is fantastic work. We've never seen it like this before.
It's interesting because it's interesting because I think a lot of that is born out of the fact that of what people ask for and what they feel they need, and the provision of that, which you get good thumbs up to, versus being shown something that they haven't quite got their heads around yet and necessarily ask for. Therefore, they don't have sort of an attachment to getting it. But also, I think that's quite common, that in terms of maturity of where organizations are, that kind of regular operational visibility of performance, of customers, of trends is what is the juice that really drives people. So that's you sort of get the thirst for that sort of stuff, and so your ability to be able to provide that. I mean, but that is reality across data science roles, is a lot of the the maturity of the stakeholders around data science is at the level of having, you know, valuable performance and reports and dashboards that show and give visibility into things, rather than a more advanced sort of model building. That is quite common that absolutely. I hear, certainly. Well, how did your I suppose, how did your role evolve there? You talked about going from analyst to data science, but
yeah,
you know, how did it evolve? And sort of where did you move on to, I suppose, is sort of the next part of your journey that would be good to just unpick.
Yeah, certainly. So I think the next. So I say I joined as a data analyst, and after about 18 months, I was fortunate enough to be promoted up to a data scientist position, or a data scientist role. Practically, I think this is one of the points we were talking about, and I always wanted to make is data science. The data science role, I think, is quite a broad descriptor for a lot of data professionals. I almost see a data science. There are data scientists that do what everyone thinks of is data science, which is to build machine learning models, optimize them, deploy them, and they work for a business. That's I guess what a machine learning. It might be a machine learning engineer does that these days, but traditionally that's what I always thought when I was doing the last stage of my PhD, and I was thinking, what do I want to go into an industry? I want to do data science. I want to be a data scientist. That's really what I had in mind when I thought I thought that's where I was going to end up. So and I obviously got through to that stage, and I got to the point where the company were going to make me a data scientist, and the idea, the ambition was for me was to do a bit more work like that. Spent some more time doing some more technical, interesting stuff with the data. At that point we had spent about, I think, 18 months with yourselves at Cynozure doing the platform build, the data warehousing platform build, which was great success. We managed to build that, deploy that. I also then got a lot during that process quite interested in the approaches and like the design of that data warehouse, and this kind of leads me as to where I went on and ended up. But so those are all really, really good experiences for me. And then when the opportunity then came, the data was all a nice platform now to start doing some more data science work. Then I leapt at the opportunity. I took the promotion, went up and started doing that. But I guess as the time went on, the problem with that was that happened just before the global pandemic hit in 2020, and the ambition for our company was to hire some additional resource. That didn't happen, so I ended up essentially not doing or fulfilling the data science role that I had in mind. But my data scientist role really was heading up the data team and kind of technically managing the data team. So taking a lead on the design of new features going into the platform, still taking a lead on a lot of the visualization work and the analytics work that was required, taking a lead sometimes on additional development work for the platform, because just to bolster resource. So I guess that there, I mean, in terms of what data scientists do, a lot of data scientists, I think, do this in companies, especially smaller companies that haven't got a full-on data team that have a established structure as to where the data scientist fits in their data team. So I think a lot of small companies will probably find, I'm sure I'm not alone in this experience, in that you become basically a data specialist. The data scientist becomes a data specialist for that business. It's someone who is technically knowledgeable enough about various aspects of the data flow or the data architecture, and can put their hand to many things. You might be expected to be able to do some analytics. You'd be expected to build some dashboards. You'd be expected to work with and maybe build and design new features for the data platform, things like that. And so I think that's where my role evolved and ended up for LW Theatres over the years.
And of course, we were very fortunate to have you sort of join Cynozure earlier this year in the role of solution architecture, and
yes,
and solution architecture. And to be a good solution architect, I think, we've actually covered quite a lot of this already in some ways, in that, solution architects are about design, foreseeing and then designing and helping to develop data platforms and data solutions and data products. But in order to do that, you really need a good understanding of business and what they're trying to achieve and how they work and how they operate and its processes and how things map together, and then design a solution that can support what the organization is trying to achieve. So and then help build that end to end. And you've had that experience end to end. You sort of very close to the commercial part of the business, helping to sell more tickets, helping to get customers to come to shows. you sort of, as you say, you move in that sort of design and adding new features to the platform and building visualizations in a way that people can consume, and the UX side of that. And so that end to end is brilliant. So it's been great that you've come across to join the team. Is that kind of was that a natural evolution for you, do you think then?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. So when it came to make that change, I mean, I came to the point where after 4 years of being at LW Theatres, I felt that my future lay elsewhere. I wanted a new challenge. I wasn't doing exactly what I wanted to do at that company at that point, and that was kind of my main decision to leave, really. And I have to admit, I think when I was looking for new jobs again, I kind of thought, well, I want to go and experience another data science role, or a job, what I would consider to be like more a data science role. So working in a data science team as a data scientist doing machine learning models. That was what I was looking for. But then when the opportunity came up, and like a lot of things in life, I think, opportunities come and go. And sometimes opportunities are just click and they fall into place. And that was very much the case when we spoke about the Cynozure opportunity and the static role. I thought about it, and I think maybe I thought at the back of my head that I just wasn't qualified to be a solution architect. It's one of those roles where you don't automatically maybe think, it's not something like, I think like a data scientist or a data analyst or a business analyst, you kind of heard about a lot of those roles, and you know about a lot of the vernacular behind those roles, and you have an idea in your head as to what that means. Solution architecture, I will admit, I didn't think of that. I didn't have that interest in my head at that time. And so but then when you actually come to think about it and talk about it, you think to yourself, okay, well, it, as you say, it involves all these things like designing solutions end to end, having a good knowledge across the technical spectrum, and also how to apply that technical knowledge into generating business value, all things like that. And those are all things that when I sat back and thought about it, I've been doing that essentially. That's what I was doing at LW Theatres for a number of years. I was helping design and build solutions for the data warehouse. I was helping define and fixate on certain use cases that I thought would help the business drive value, and then working on solutions to deliver that, which is essentially what, as a solution architect, day to day we aim and we strive to do. So I think it did feel quite a natural progression for me, actually. I think once I'd made that connection in my head, and all right, actually, yeah, I can do this, and this is the sort of role that I feel I'd really enjoy. I mean, just taking that, for me, I think it was more about having the right balance of sort of between technical skill and being able to do some technical work and business work. That's kind of where I got to. I think I got to the point where LW Theatres where I was too entrenched in one side or the other and not doing the sort of technical side of things that I would like to be doing.
Well, solution architect's perfect role for that glue between business need and technical solution. So
who would have thought?
Who would have thought? It's obviously great to have you here, and I think your story is so relevant as well. There's so many people in academia thinking about what do I do and where do I go, and do I do more academia? Do I go into industry? What's it really like in industry? How's it different from what I've seen, in academia? So I think this conversation is going to be so relevant to so many people. I guess that just on that, to finish off, like, what would you say to someone nearing kind of the end of their, or who is in academia, maybe even not nearing the end, but in academia and planning a move or thinking of a move to industry? What would be some of the kind of key things you suggest that they think about, they explore, or or otherwise?
Yeah, I think absolutely, it's one of those things where I think you in academia you have lots of ups and downs throughout, especially doing a PhD. You have loads of these like troughs, peaks and troughs. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't work very well. Sometimes you're getting great responses at conferences, sometimes you're getting no responses, and there's a lot of up and down. I think all PhDs students at some point consider, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go and get a job and do things that's less stressful and might, who knows, I can make an actual difference to a company that I work for. So I think the main things, I actually had this, I said to you before we started, I had this conversation with someone at the weekend about moving from academia into industry. And I mean, first and foremost, I'd always say, really, it's about, like, if you still enjoy working in academia and you still enjoy doing the science, then just stay doing it. It's, if that spark or that flame hasn't died out in your head and you still really enjoy doing it every day, day to day, then There's no point.
Yeah.
You're a born academic, you're a born researcher at that point. I mean, until that flame goes out, I'd stick doing it because it is such a great and such a very interesting job, and you have lots of opportunities. But for people who obviously are thinking about it and are like a bit more like me, who kind of recognised from the outs, really from not from the outset, but throughout the PhD or throughout the academic process, that they were probably unlikely to stay in it long term. I mean, there are sort of very specific career paths, I think, in the academia space. So obviously you get your PhD. It's in science, in like physics research. You get your PhD, you'd go and become a postdoctoral researcher, basically a jobbing scientist. If you're then fortunate enough, after doing that for a number of years, you might become a lecturer or a reader, and then from there you can go up and then become a professor, a more senior chair. That's quite it's a tough path, and to do that at an established university, a good university, is really difficult because obviously there aren't that many of them, and there are only so many seats you can get at a university. So there's that. So I think the career wise, it's a tough one. Whereas if you move into industry, you have a much wider spectrum of career paths you can go down. You might be for myself. I mean, I knew a lot of people who went from academia into industry but stayed in the research sector and doing science. So you might go and, from our perspective, you might have gone and worked for a company that does semiconductor characterization or solar cell characterization in a lab, things like that. Whereas I obviously chose to go down the software route and look at the data science route of things. So there's obviously lots of options there. The money is also obviously, I mean, I don't want to make it all about money, but obviously that has slight bearing. I mean, you can get paid, and you will be paid more money in industry than you will when you're staying on as a researcher. That shouldn't be obviously the driving factor. I think for me, the driving factor is always about enjoyment. Do you feel you will get the most enjoyment and the challenge out of being in academia long term, or do you want to go in and work for a company and help make that company better? Essentially, is the main thing. And obviously, as a scientist, as a researcher going through, there are a number of things you can do to help yourself doing that. Obviously, having getting as much experience in kind of like specific practical courses wise. So I was fortunate enough. I did a machine learning data science course that was run by Yandex in I think the final couple of months of my PhD. It was I just very, very fortunate. It happened to be running for a number of weeks. And I took that on that course. That was really useful, super useful. Really, it gave me a really good grounding in like the various types of machine learning model. It was probably a little bit too technical because they went into real like the proper linear algebra and mathematical definition of how these things work, which is quite daunting. But what was more useful is they gave you some practical demonstrations using Python and using some well-worked examples of how to apply these to real world problems, and that was really useful. So definitely, as an academic coming through or someone coming through, keep an eye out for things like that. Have an eye on the sort of area you want to move in. If you know you want to go into computer programming or into data science or into just R&D, then anything there. I mean, R&D is different because you've already got a lot of those skills at university that you're never going to get anywhere else because lab-based skills are quite hard to come by. But definitely software engineering and software and data science, so many great courses online, so many great courses you can get involved with that can help boost your skills. And that will look, obviously any prospective employer is going to look for that and make sure you can speak knowledgeably about these areas. So yeah, it's something that you might necessarily find yourself doing day to day in the lab or in modeling, but it's all related.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, fascinating stuff, Tom. I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to us about your experiences that you now also get to apply to lots of our wonderful customers, which is great.
Exactly,
thanks so much for coming on the show, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been great. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. It's been awesome.
Yeah, no worries. And hope everyone enjoyed the show. Particularly interested to hear from people in academia who have listened to this and the value they got and any questions they have for Tom. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll catch you again soon sometime.